All right, so get ready because today we're diving into some serious strategy.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be unpacking Robert Greene's Declare War, Polarity strategy for power and clarity.
Okay.
And specifically, we're tackling that first rather bold strategy,
hmm
declare war on your enemies. Now, before you start, building barricades and all that,
Yeah.
this isn't about throwing punches, right?
No.
It's about understanding those forces
Right.
that oppose you
Uh-huh.
so you can achieve greater clarity and focus and ultimately power.
What I find so fascinating about Greene's approach
Okay.
is that it really goes against the grain of typical self-help advice.
Right.
We're so often told to avoid conflict,
Right.
to be agreeable,
Please everybody.
yeah, please everybody. But he argues that strategic conflict,
Okay.
knowing your enemies,
Mm-hmm.
can actually lead to a stronger sense of self and purpose.
That's so interesting because it feels so counterintuitive.
And it,
Right. But I'm starting to see how understanding those opposing forces could actually be beneficial.
think of it like this. Imagine you're building a house, right?
Okay.
Your enemies are those things working against a solid foundation. Maybe it's termites, maybe it's unstable ground.
Right, right.
You need to know what you're up against in order to build something that lasts.
So it's about identifying the threats to your goals,
Yes.
whether they're actual people or just obstacles in your path.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the value in that. But what if I'm someone who really hates conflict? How does this declaring war idea apply to me?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing is we have to sort of redefine what we mean by enemy.
Right.
It's not necessarily a person you despise.
Right.
It could be a bad habit,
Mhm.
a limiting belief,
Okay.
or even a system that's rigged against you.
So for someone who's conflict averse, maybe their enemy is procrastination or a fear of public speaking, something internal holding them back.
Exactly. It's about strategically identifying the forces that are working against your goals and values,
Okay.
no matter what form they take.
Got it.
And Greene gives a really powerful example of this in Action, Napoleon.
Okay. Napoleon. Now, he definitely wasn't afraid of conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
And his story perfectly illustrates this power of understanding your enemies. So, post-French Revolution, Europe's monarchies, they wanted to crush this new republic.
Right. Crush it.
What did Napoleon do? He didn't try to appease them.
Right.
He declared war, understanding that their goal was fundamentally opposed to his own. There was no room for compromise.
So in that case, declaring war
Yeah.
meant recognizing the reality of the situation
Yes,
and taking decisive action. That's pretty intense.
it is.
But I see how that clarity
Right.
really helped him kind of reshape Europe's power structure.
That's the key takeaway here. Knowing your enemies, understanding their motivations, allows you to move forward with clarity and purpose.
Yeah.
And this concept isn't just limited to, historical figures.
Right. It applies to the business world as well.
Oh, I'd love to hear a business example. Give me something I can really sink my teeth into.
Okay. Well, consider Apple under Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Jobs didn't just want to make a good computer.
Yeah.
He positioned Apple as the cool, rebellious underdog,
Right.
the antithesis of the corporate giant Microsoft.
Ah, the classic us versus them strategy.
Right.
So by defining their enemy, Apple actually strengthened their brand identity.
Precisely. And it resonated deeply with customers.
Yeah.
People wanted to be part of that movement to align themselves with the underdog, the
Yeah.
innovator.
Yeah.
It created this sense of belonging and loyalty.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about identifying your enemies, but also strategically using that opposition to your advantage.
Exactly. It's about understanding how these forces can be leveraged to sharpen your focus, clarify your message, and ultimately achieve greater success. This is making me think about my own creative projects, I often get bogged down by self-doubt, constantly second-guessing myself. Maybe that's an enemy I need to declare war on.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
And it highlights how this concept can apply to personal growth as well.
So how do we take this idea of declaring war and make it work for us in our everyday lives? Because, facing those enemies, those obstacles, can feel pretty daunting.
It starts with honestly assessing your situation.
Okay.
What's truly holding you back from reaching your goals? What forces are working against your vision?
And those could be internal forces like, self-doubt or fear, or external ones like a competitive job market, or even societal expectations, right?
Exactly. Once you identify those enemies, you can start to strategize.
But what happens when we don't clearly define our enemies? Is there a danger in staying neutral? trying to avoid conflict altogether.
That's where we get to Greene's warning about the pitfalls of neutrality.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Greene argues that constantly striving for neutrality can actually be a form of weakness. It can lead to indecision, stagnation, and even make you vulnerable to manipulation. He uses Abraham Lincoln and the American Civil War as a really powerful example of this.
Lincoln, that's interesting. Initially, he hoped to preserve the Union without resorting to, full-blown conflict, right?
Right. And that hesitancy, that attempt to appease everyone, actually prolonged the conflict and made things worse. It wasn't until Lincoln fully committed to the war effort to defeating the Confederacy that the tide turned.
So by avoiding conflict initially, by trying to stay neutral, he actually ended up prolonging it. Lincoln's story highlights a crucial point. Sometimes decisive action, even if it's uncomfortable, is necessary to achieve a larger goal.
And that brings us to another important element of this strategy, choosing your battles wisely.
Okay, I can see how this is getting nuanced. So it's not about declaring war on everything and everyone, right?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Overdoing it can lead to scattered efforts and even damage valuable relationships. It's about picking the right battles, the ones that truly matter.
So how do we know which battles are worth fighting?
That's where strategy comes in. You have to weigh the potential gains against the potential costs.
And I imagine that's a very personal calculation, depending on, our individual goals and values.
Precisely. It's about being intentional with your energy and focus. And to illustrate the importance of choosing your battles wisely, Greene uses the cautionary tale of Julius Caesar.
Oh, Caesar. Another historical heavyweight. I'm all ears.
Caesar was a brilliant military strategist,
Right.
conquering vast territories,
Uh-huh.
but he made one fatal error. He made too many enemies in Rome.
Yeah.
Instead of consolidating his power and building alliances,
Right.
he alienated powerful senators.
And we all know how that ended. Talk about an et tu, Brute moment. It shows that even with all the power in the world, picking the wrong enemies can be fatal.
It's a powerful reminder that strategy is essential,
Yeah.
even when it comes to conflict.
So we've established that defining our enemies can be beneficial.
Yes.
But we also need to be strategic about who or what we choose to declare war on.
Right.
But how do we actually apply this thinking in a practical way?
Well, the first step is to honestly assess your situation.
Hmm.
Identify your true enemies. What or who is genuinely holding you back from achieving your goals, living your best life?
It could be a person, a bad habit, a limiting belief, even a system that's working against you.
Once you've identified the real obstacles, the next step is to establish clear boundaries. Stop trying to appease everyone to fit in where you don't belong. Focus your energy on what truly matters.
And this is where that decisive action comes in, right?
Right.
Once you recognize a threat, deal with it completely. Don't hesitate.
Exactly. Commit to the battle. And remember, a well-defined enemy can actually strengthen your identity. It clarifies your values, your purpose. It gives you something to fight for.
Okay, so we've identified our enemies, we've set those boundaries, and we've committed to action. What's next? I feel like there's got to be more to it than just, charging in head first.
You're absolutely right. And that's where Greene's next point comes in. Stay focused.
Okay.
It's not enough to simply declare war.
Right.
You have to fight the right battles, and you have to see them through.
I can see how it'd be easy to get distracted, right?
Yeah.
Especially in our world today. There's always, some new drama, some new conflict popping up.
Exactly. It's like that saying, don't fight every battle, pick the war. You have to be strategic with your energy. Don't get sidetracked by trivial conflicts or things that don't align with your ultimate goals.
So it's about having that big picture perspective, knowing where battles will actually, move the needle in your life.
Right. And this ties back to that earlier point about strengthening your identity. When you consistently choose to fight for what matters most, it reinforces who you are and what you stand for.
I'm curious about that. You mentioned earlier that having a well-defined enemy can strengthen your identity. How does that work? It seems counterintuitive that opposition could make you stronger.
It is a fascinating concept, isn't it? But think about it this way. When you define what you're against, you automatically define what you're for. It's like a mirror image.
So if my enemy is procrastination,
Right.
and I declare war on that bad habit,
Uh-huh.
I'm essentially affirming my commitment to productivity and action.
Exactly. By consistently fighting against procrastination, you're not just getting more done, you're solidifying your identity as a proactive, disciplined person.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's like each time you choose to overcome that obstacle, you're reinforcing your own values.
Precisely. And that's why choosing your enemies carefully is so important.
Yeah.
The battles you choose to fight will ultimately shape the person you become.
This is really making me think about how I approach challenges in general. Maybe instead of getting overwhelmed, I need to reframe those challenges as enemies, and
Right.
strategize how to overcome them.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
It shifts your mindset from feeling powerless to feeling empowered. It puts you in the driver's seat.
I'm also realizing that this declare war strategy isn't just about achieving, external success.
Right.
It's also about internal growth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about becoming a more focused, decisive, and resilient version of yourself.
This whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do we know when we've successfully won a war?
Right.
Like, what does victory look like in this context?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember that victory doesn't always mean complete eradication of the enemy.
Right.
Sometimes it's about managing it,
Okay.
containing it, or reducing its power over you.
So it's more about making progress, gaining ground, rather than striving for some, unattainable perfection.
Exactly. It's about moving forward, even if it's one small battle at a time. And sometimes winning means knowing when to walk away from a battle that's no longer serving you.
That makes sense. It's about having the wisdom to choose your battles,
Hmm.
the courage to fight them, and the flexibility to, adapt your strategy as needed.
Right. And that brings us to another important point that Greene emphasizes. This is an ongoing process.
Oh,
The
yeah?
world is constantly changing, and so are our enemies.
So what might have been a huge obstacle yesterday could be completely irrelevant tomorrow.
Exactly. And new challenges will inevitably arise. So we need to stay vigilant,
Mhm.
keep reassessing our situation, and be willing to adapt our strategies as needed.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, right? The idea of, strategically using opposition to your advantage. I can see how that would be so crucial in a constantly evolving world.
Absolutely. The ability to adapt and pivot is essential. And one way to do that is to pay attention to what's happening around you. What are the emerging trends,
Yeah.
the challenges, and the opportunities?
So it's about staying informed, being aware of the forces at play, and adjusting your approach accordingly.
Precisely. And it's also about learning from your experiences,
Right.
both successes and failures.
Of course.
What worked, what didn't? How can you apply those lessons to future battles?
It sounds like this declare war strategy isn't just about, winning individual battles. It's about developing a strategic mindset that can be applied to, like, any area of life.
You're exactly right. It's about cultivating a way of thinking that empowers you to navigate challenges, achieve your goals, and ultimately become the architect of your own life.
I love that analogy, the architect of your own life. It's about taking ownership of your choices and shaping your destiny.
And it's about recognizing that conflict, when approached strategically,
Right.
can actually be a catalyst for growth and transformation.
I'm realizing that this whole conversation has been about so much more than just declaring war. It's about developing self-awareness, resilience, and a strategic approach to life in general.
And it's about recognizing that you have the power to choose your battles, to fight for what matters, and to create a life that aligns with your values.
I think one thing that might be helpful for our listeners to hear some concrete examples of how this declare war strategy plays out in the real world.
Right.
Can you give me a specific example from your own life?
Sure. Well, one enemy I've had to declare war on is my own perfectionism. It used to really paralyze me, preventing me from, taking action and putting myself out there.
So how did you declare war on perfectionism? What did that battle look like?
It started with recognizing that perfectionism was holding me back. It was preventing me from taking risks, from learning and growing.
So that was your first step, identifying the enemy.
Right.
What did you do next?
The next step was to establish clear boundaries. I had to stop striving for unattainable standards
Right.
and instead focus on progress over perfection.
That sounds like a tough mental shift to make.
Yeah. It was, but it was also incredibly liberating. I started giving myself permission to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to keep moving forward.
So instead of letting perfectionism paralyze you, you kind of used it as fuel for growth.
Exactly. And over time, that consistent effort to overcome my perfectionism has made me a more confident, resilient, and productive person.
That's a really inspiring example. And it highlights how this declare war strategy can be applied to our own internal struggles,
All right.
not just external challenges.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership of your own growth and development.
I think another great example of this strategy in action can be seen in the world of branding and marketing.
Oh, that's a fascinating one. Greene actually talks about this in the book. He uses companies like Tesla and Nike as prime examples.
Right. They don't just tell you what they're for, they also make it clear what they're against.
It's that us versus them dynamic again,
Right.
creating a sense of belonging, of shared values that resonates deeply with their target audience.
And that's a powerful tool, isn't it?
It is.
By defining what you oppose,
Right, right.
you automatically clarify what you stand for. So if we connect this back to our own lives,
Yes.
how can we use this principle to our advantage?
Yeah.
How can we define what we stand for and what we oppose in a way that empowers us
Right.
and attracts the right people into our orbit?
That's a great question, and I think it starts with self-awareness.
Okay.
What are your core values? What are you passionate about? What are you willing to fight for?
And on the flip side, what are your deal breakers?
Yeah,
What are the things you absolutely will not tolerate?
exactly.
What are the values or behaviors that you find repellent?
Once you have a clear understanding of your own moral compass,
Right.
you can start to define your enemies in a way that aligns with your values.
This doesn't mean you have to go around picking fights with everyone who disagrees with you,
Right.
but it does mean being willing to stand up for what you believe in,
Yes.
to draw boundaries,
Absolutely.
and to say no to the things that don't serve you. It's about having the courage to be polarizing, to be different, to stand out from the crowd.
And in a world that's increasingly homogenized, that's a powerful thing.
I love that. It's about embracing our individuality,
Yeah.
our uniqueness, and using it as a force for good in the world.
Exactly. And it all starts with declaring war on the things that are holding us back, the things that are preventing us from being our true selves.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into Robert Greene's Declare War strategy.
It has.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this powerful concept. And I have a feeling we're going to be unpacking this one for a long time to come. There's so much wisdom here, so much to explore. But for our listener today, let's bring it back to them. We've covered a lot of ground. What are some key takeaways you want them to walk away with?
I think the biggest one is this. You have more power than you realize.
Okay.
Declare war isn't about becoming a confrontational person, right?
Right.
It's about understanding the forces at play in your life and making conscious choices about where you direct your energy.
Yeah.
It's about taking control of your narrative.
I love that. Taking control of your narrative. It's so easy to feel like we're just reacting to circumstances.
Right.
But this framework really empowers you to become the author of your own story.
And a crucial part of that is identifying those enemies. And remember, we're not talking about literal enemies here,
Right?
but rather those obstacles, internal or external, that are preventing you from living your best life.
It could be fear, self-doubt, procrastination, even a toxic relationship or a system that's working against you.
Exactly. And once you've identified those enemies, you can start to strategize how to overcome them.
It's about setting clear boundaries, committing to action, and staying focused on the battles that truly matter. And as you said earlier, it's an ongoing process. We need to be adaptable, willing to adjust our strategies as the world around us changes.
Right. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question, one that they can really sit with. As you reflect on your own life, your work, your relationships, your personal goals, what is one enemy that you're ready to declare war on?
What's that one thing that's been holding you back, keeping you from reaching your full potential?
Identify it, confront it, and declare war. You have the power to create change in your life.
That's a powerful note to end on. And to our listener, we encourage you to take this idea and run with it. Explore what declaring war means to you. Embrace the challenge. Step into your power. And create the life you were meant to live. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.